My name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS, and today I have a top 10 list of my favourite depictions of the devil in media. And let's not waste any more time, let's get right into it with my number 10, and it is Darkness from the 1984 film Legend. And this film tells the story of Princess Lily, who, when she's out in the middle of the woodland with her friend, the elf child Jack, played by Tom Cruise, they stumble into a clearing where the last two unicorns of existence reside. And when Princess Lily goes into the clearing to go to touch one of the unicorns while singing a beautiful lullaby from the score sheet of Jerry Goldsmith, we get a rippling effect which allows the agents of darkness, aka the devil, to steal one of the unicorns, thus killing one of the unicorns and imprisoning the other unicorn, since the other unicorn can't survive without its mate. And the whole entire film is essentially darkness tempting Lily into committing the final temptation, which is to kill the last of the unicorns so that she can envelop the world in an eternal darkness. And the way Darkness is depicted in this film, he's played by Tim Curry, and he plays him kind of almost as a sassy, but very almost soothsaying kind of individual, where he can spout little moments of poetry, but you never really quite know his true motive. You never really know whether he's just doing this sort of temptation lark in order to tempt Lily so that he can get what he wants, or whether he is actually doing it because he genuinely loves Lily. And it's one of those things where it really is deliberately left up in the air for the audience's interpretation. And I really like the fact that in the film's climax, he says, "You'll be nothing without me. What is light without a little bit of darkness?" And it really kind of gives you this idea that the devil in this film is essentially someone who is essentially doing what comes naturally to him. It's not something that he chooses to do. He's just doing something that's in his nature. He is naturally comfortable in darkness. He's comfortable in dark surroundings, or surroundings that are sparsely lit. He's comfortable with the essence of evil, and he just is doing what comes naturally to him. Like when the devil fell from grace in Paradise Lost, he didn't necessarily want to fall from grace. He didn't want to stop becoming God's favourite. He wanted to be, the best angel that he could be. But he took the best of a bad situation, and he said, well, okay, if I'm going to be evil, then so be it. I'm just going to enjoy the darkness. I'm going to enjoy the isolation. I'm going to enjoy the lonerhood that is effectively being the Lord of Hell. And that effectively is sort of at play in Darkness's role in Legend. But I just want to say this film is fantastic. It's got a great cast. Like I said, Tom Cruise, Tim Curry as well. But there's so many great aspects to it. It's shot beautifully. It looks gorgeous. And of course, Jerry Goldsmith's score is absolutely breathtaking. I love it. It's fascinating, especially when it comes to the scene with the temptation of Princess Lily, where the black dress comes around and they're kind of like doing these ballet routine moves, or it's almost like a waltz. And Jerry Goldsmith's score is absolutely gorgeous. There is a clip on YouTube which is just basically of that scene where Princess Lily gets tempted, and I love it. I love Jerry Goldsmith's orchestra. I love the echoey voices. I love how it sounds slightly sinister, but it's also kind of beautiful in a way. So it really kind of encompasses that sense of you're being tempted, but you don't know that you're being tempted, which I think is really interesting. And it's such an amazing film. I'd highly recommend you watch it if you get the chance to. But if you ever get the chance to watch any cut of the film, please watch the European cut, because I feel like the European cut really does add... It has Jerry Goldsmith's music, so I feel like that's the only reason to see it alone. I have seen the American cut with the Tangerine Dream score, but I just don't think it works. I think it dates the film. It makes it look very 80s, and I just feel like it dates the film, whereas Jerry Goldsmith adds a very timeless quality to the events that are going on in the story. And I think it's just way better, in my opinion. Let me know what you think of that opinion down in the comments, but that's just my number 10, and that is Darkness from Legend. My number 9 is Mephistopheles from the Inside Number 9 episode, How Do You Plead? And this story, like a lot of Inside Number 9 episodes, it presents itself as a very interesting story about two people from both different sides of life, one of which is at the height of his life, where he's got a good career, good prospects, and one guy who is literally on death's door. He has an oxygen mask over him, he's in his pyjamas, he's coughing up a storm, and he is a lawyer who feels like he's on death's door. He doesn't have much time left, but he wants one more case. And at the start of this episode, it doesn't present itself as a deal with the devil type of story, but then the twist is that Mephistopheles, aka the devil, shows up and he's played by one of the show's creators, Steve Pemberton. And the way Steve Pemberton plays it is he's very predatory. He's very predatory, and he could be sophisticated. He's wearing a suit and he has his hair sort of like semi-bald, but with sort of like a quiff at the back that, you know, is tied up into a ponytail. And he could be sophisticated, he could be intellectual, he could be a soothsayer like Darkness in Legend and spout moments of poetry, but he's a businessman. And when he feels like he's being messed around, he loses his patience and he starts to shout. Like what the way he shouts Webster's name, played by Derek Jacobi in this episode, it always gives me a jolt of both excitement and fear. Like I really do feel that sense of intimidation from Steve Pemberton's performance as the devil. But he's this guy who is a businessman, but when he feels like he's being cheated, he doesn't like to wait that long. So you really do get the sense that he could be sophisticated. He could be, you know, he could outsmart you in a game of chess if he wanted to. If he had the time in the world, he could. But because he's on such a tight schedule, he doesn't want to. So he just says, well, okay, screw that. Let's just get down to brass tacks. Where's my soul? Where's Daniel Webster? Let's get this over with. And it's really well done. The episode itself is a really well written episode, and I feel like Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith really show off their creative writing chops to an exceptional degree in this episode, because they really do fool you. They really do make you think, oh, you're watching this story about a dying lawyer learning to repent, but then you realise that, oh, it's actually a story that's a deal with the devil type of story, and it's very well done. I suppose I've let a little bit of a spoiler loose with this episode having it be featured on this list, but I think it's an amazing episode, and Steve Pemberton gives a wonderful performance. So that's my number 9, Mephistopheles from Inside Number 9 episode, How Do You Plead? And my number 8 is Black Phillip from the film The Witch, and it's presented as if it's called The Witch, but really that's just the way writing was written. That's the way often a lot of letters were written back in the 18th or 17th century, where the Salem witch trials took place. Where if you look at a lot of old manuscripts, you often see, you know, you often see certain letters, like say for example the letter S looks like a reverse F in our alphabet, and I really do find that quite interesting. So yeah, Black Phillip in this episode is a goat, or he's a ram, and he is quite playful, but you wouldn't want to hang around with him very often just in case he ends up impaling you on one of his horns. But what I really like about the devil in this version, or Black Phillip in this version, is you don't really hear him speak. He doesn't really have that much of a presence to begin with. But then when things start to go wrong, the children are starting to say, oh, it's actually Thomason, played by Anya Taylor-Joy. She's a witch. She says she was made a pact with the devil and things like that. And thou hast to see what she's really like. And I love the language of this film too. I could do an entire video on this film. But I really do think it's an amazing film. Black Phillip is really kind of, I hope you don't mind me saying, but he is one of the most adorable depictions of the devil I've ever seen in a long time. Like there are moments in this film where I actually found myself going, oh, Black Phillip is really adorable. But then also at the same time I'm thinking, oh my god, why am I saying that? Like, it's the devil. It's meant to be the personification of evil. Like, it really does give you that conflicted idea. But when you think, oh, it's just children being crazy, or it's just children using their imaginations, whenever you hear them talk about, oh, Black Phillip said this, Black Phillip told us to do that. But then when Thomason, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, actually does come into her own as a witch, we don't actually see him speak, but we do actually hear his voice, and we do hear him speak in this very kind of breathy, very kind of glacial tone, like, what dost thou want? And would thou like to live deliciously? And things like that. And I really do love how it completely and utterly flips the script on you. And it really shows that Black Phillip has a lot more to him than meets the eye. And it really is rather terrifying, but I love this incarnation of the devil. I really do think it's such an interesting idea because it's so deceptive. Like I said, I actually thought Black Phillip looked really adorable if he didn't have the long ram's horns, but the fact that he literally also does that, but then he could also be quite intimidating, but then he could also be really adorable, that really goes to show what a power this creature has over its human counterparts, and it really is well done. And this entire film is just wonderful. I'd highly recommend it if you haven't seen it already. It's by Robert Eggers, and it was his debut, actually, so I'd highly recommend it if you're interested. It's called The Witch, and that's my number 8, Black Phillip from The Witch. My number 7 is him from the Powerpuff Girls, and this character is interesting to me because he looks quite goofy. He's wearing kind of like, his hair done up like in a 1950s housewife style. He's wearing, long high-heeled shoes, like leathery high-heeled shoes. He has kind of like an apron on, what looks like an apron, like a fluffy pink apron on over him. But then he has lobster claws, and he sounds very kind of almost relaxed, very almost kind of relaxed and almost away with the fairies almost in the way he vocalizes himself. Like he says, "Oh, don't worry." There's almost when he speaks, he sounds very hushed or very husky, but then he also has this almost echoey effect, like he's from another world, and he goes like, "Oh, don't worry, everything's going to be all right. I'll take care of you. Now do as I say before I actually kill you both," or something like that. Like he'll go from being very lovely, very charming, and very sweet and very plain, but then he'll say, "Oh, well, do as I say or I'll kill you," or something like that, and he'll go from that to being very aggressive and very loud and very almost, spitting out his words. And it's such a very good performance by Tom Kane, I think his name is, who's the voice actor who plays him. And he does a lot of voices for the Powerpuff Girls as well as for its sibling series, Dexter's Laboratory. But I feel like this character is very well done. He can be very funny, but I think some of the best episodes, some of the darker episodes of the Powerpuff Girls are often him as the villain. And I do really feel like he really does add a certain degree of intimidation and horror to a series that very easily could be just written off as kind of like a show that's very much dedicated to girls or very much dedicated to women. And I really do feel that that's something that's really quite interesting, that it really does add a new dimension and a new layer to this show that could be marketed towards a certain demographic, and it was, but then there are a lot of male fans of this show as well, myself included, so there's a lot of elements to that really does add so many further dimensions. But him's a great character. If you can, I'd highly recommend looking up a lot of episodes with him in it. He really is a fantastic villain. Or he's a really fantastic character, and I think he's just amazing, and he's one of my favourite depictions of the devil. He's my number 7. And my number 6 is the devil from the Omen series. And this entry is going to be kind of like my entry for Death in the Final Destination film series, in the sense that he doesn't really have that much of a presence. He doesn't really have a personality. He doesn't really show off his personality. He's not really, embodying the form of anybody in particular. He doesn't really have a face, so to speak, but he's more of a presence in the sense that he has all the power in this story. He has all the cards on his side, because the second the Thorns adopt Damien, things start to go wrong. Like, say, for example, when the nanny commits suicide by jumping off of the roof and hanging herself. That's quite a horrific twist of events, but then all sorts of other things happen, including one of the doctors from Doctor Who ending up getting impaled by a giant pole on a church, and a photojournalist, getting his head cut off by a sheet of glass in Rome, played by David Warner. So there's a lot of very horrific sequences. But sometimes those are just the scenes that I'm mentioning where the devil gets involved. There's all sorts of other scenes where lots of other people are getting killed, blown up, or getting pushed out of hospital windows in the 1976 version of The Omen. There's so many horrific scenes. The worst scene doesn't even involve the devil for me. Like the scene where the mother is in hospital and she's putting on like a nightgown or like a dress or a veil, and she turns around and she sees the nanny, and she's sort of like staring at her with this very sinister look on her face, and the Jerry Goldsmith score's like going crazy, like "Hey diddles" and things like that. It really does add so much terror, and nothing really happens, but you're just waiting for something to happen. But then it cuts to the ambulance siren, and it's going by, and on, and then you just see those nurses just chatting, and then you hear the shattered glass, and then you just see the mother just flying out the window, and you just hear these collective screams, and it's quite horrific. You don't really see that much, but it is really horrific, and the devil doesn't even have a hand in that. Like, he literally just lets that happen, and I'm just thinking to myself, my god, if the followers can be that brutal, this version of the devil has to be particularly sinister. So it almost has an almost like he's not necessarily actively having a role in the story, but he does influence other people's actions, and it really is quite horrific. So even though he is a bit of a non-entity, he could be written off as almost like a Death clone from Final Destination before Death was a thing in the Final Destination series, in the case of the 1976 film. But he does actually have a lot more to him just by being a presence. Like the fact that he's just literally there encouraging these people to do these horrible things, or his son to do these horrible things, it really goes to show how evil and manipulative the devil can be. So that's my number 6, the devil from The Omen. And my number 5 is Leland Gaunt from Needful Things. And Needful Things is probably one of those Stephen King books which, when I got it, I absolutely fled through it. It was one of those books where I found myself going, I couldn't put it down. And I was absolutely shocked, I was appalled, but I was also really intrigued by the world of Castle Rock and its residents. And Leland Gaunt, he isn't expressly identified as the devil. He's mostly, just an innocent-looking guy who owns a shop called Needful Things, in which he basically sells antiques. What looks like stereotypical antiques, but he sells all sorts of different things. Let's say, for example, if you wanted a baseball card, he'd have just the sort of baseball card that you're looking for. Or if you wanted, say, for example, in a modern day setting, if you wanted a PS5, he'd say, oh, I happen to have that. Here's my version of a PS5. And he'd say, oh, well, how much is it? Like, how much do I owe you? And he goes, oh, you don't need to pay me anything, but you can do this one thing for me. You see, there's this person in Castle Rock that's been bugging me of late, and he'll start to very quickly, develop this story, and he says, oh, we can just play a little joke on this person. Like, it's only innocent, only harmful fun. But then when the jokes are played, the pranks are played on these people, it tends to have this kind of almost, China doll effect, where other people get blamed for the tragedy or other people get blamed for the joke, and it turns really horrible and really sinister. And it's really quite horrific. But even then, just because you were told to play this joke on someone when you got your gift doesn't mean that someone's going to play a joke, doesn't play a joke on you when you get your gift. So it really goes to show that Leland Gaunt doesn't care about anybody in the town of Castle Rock. He doesn't care about anybody. To him, it's just basically stirring up what he's always done, what's always been in, almost in the case of Darkness and Legend, it's almost been in his nature. Leland Gaunt, in his nature, wants evil. He wants chaos. So he doesn't really care who gets killed or who gets caught in the crossfires. He's just doing his job. And when it's done, when he's caused as much mischief as possible, he's going to move to another town and do more, more destructive things there. And he's not going to be affected because no one's going to know who he is. And that's effectively one of the most dark, most sinister aspects of Leland Gaunt. But I love him. He's played by Max von Sydow in the film adaptation of Needful Things. But I just love him in the book. He always reminds me of, I know this is going to sound very weird, but he almost reminds me of a very, he almost reminds me of a Robert Carlyle type of figure, where he can be very down to earth and be very kind of pally with you, but then he also has kind of like a bit of an edge to him that's really kind of sinister. That's what I kind of feel with Leland Gaunt, but he's just wonderful. He's one of my favourite characters in the Stephen King universe, and he's just fabulous. So that's my number 5. That is Leland Gaunt from Needful Things, the book and the film adaptation. So my number 4 is Chernabog from Fantasia. And Chernabog is effectively the devil. The whole entire premise with Fantasia is it was released in 1940, and it was just after, I think, Bambi. It was the 4th feature of Walt Disney Studios, where it was getting back up and running. And they wanted to basically create something that was a bit of an experiment, where they basically said, well, let's take classical music, the works of Tchaikovsky, and essentially put them to animation. And in this instance, Chernabog is meant to be a play on The Night on Bald Mountain. And if you hear the score from Tchaikovsky, it really does give you a certain impression. You really do get this impression that there is this horrible winged creature over the mountain. The way he sort of reveals himself, where he's sort of hunched down, and then his wing, when he sort of sits up, his wings sort of sprout out. He sort of has this really big kind of like booming, like, bodybuilder bouncer sort of arms folded look to him. And he's sort of looking over the world, and he's sort of seeing what sort of chaos can I create with this amazing, world, this amazing village that I've created. and you see his powers, you see his evil through just visuals. You see that he's able to turn beauty into disgrace and, disgust. He's able to turn, love into lust and, absolute a perversion of other things that is all that's good, and all that's plain and wonderful and great about life is turned into an absolute perversion of itself, where it's turned twisted, it's turned dark, and it's turned sinister. And I really love Chernobog. I love his look. I love the fact that he has this very sinister smile when he looks down at his creations, but then he'll create something, but then he'll throw it into the flames as soon as he's finished with it. And I really do love that. I love how sinister it shows the devil in this instance. And I know they call him Chernobog, but he's the devil. He's the devil himself, and he is basically the pure personification of evil. And he's so well animated as well. And I love. Here's a little bit of interesting history. They were going to get, for the visual reference for Chernobog, they were going to get Bela Lugosi, the actor who played Dracula. But because the director was giving him all sorts of different directions, he wanted to do it his own way, and he wanted to be more, theatrical. He said, no, we want you to do stuff like this and things like that. And they said, well, if you're so good at it, why don't you just do it? So they got the animation director to get, to take his shirt off and just basically, do all these actions. And they basically just followed him. But they were going to choose Bela Lugosi, and I thought that was a very interesting bit of detail. But this character is amazing. I love this character. When I played the boss segment in Kingdom Hearts of Chernobog, I absolutely loved it. I loved the version that I got because they got the original Tchaikovsky Night on Ball Mountain score, and I just loved fighting that character to that score because it was just so intense and so, incredibly dark and sinister. But yeah, that's Chernobog, my number 4 from Fantasia. That's my 4th entry. My number 3 is Satan from Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. And this character isn't even in much of Lords of Shadow 2, but his presence is felt in regards to how he treats his children, the acolytes, to how he basically sees the end of humanity. And he is evil. He's the pure personification of evil. In Castlevania Lords of Shadow 1, he is Gabriel Belmont's nemesis, who is God's chosen one. And he is basically the personification of pure evil. He's one of the Lords of Shadow. But when he is destroyed, Dracula has to basically become one of the Lords of Shadow. So when he does actually become Dracula, Vlad Tepes the dragon, he resides in isolation for a good portion of it. But when he comes back into the 21st century London, he ends up, becoming God's chosen one again. And he makes a deal with death that if they destroy Satan and his children, the acolytes, together, he will give Dracula the ultimate release, the eternal rest that he's been craving all this time. So does Dracula end up, succeeding in defeating Satan, or does he fail? And that's kind of the big hook of the story. And there's all these other things that come into play. But I'd love to do a full review of Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 one day. But I just love it so much. I love the story. I love the characters. I just love the world building as well. I really do. Castlevania is an amazing video game series if you haven't played already, but it's amazing. And Satan's just wonderfully sinister. And of course, the only person who can stop him is the Lord of Darkness himself, Dracula. So that's my number 3. It's Satan from Castlevania Lords of Shadow 1 and 2. My number 2 is Lucifer from Dante's Inferno. And Dante's Inferno, I'm talking about the video game here, by Electronic Arts, and Lucifer in this version is depicted in a very interesting way. He's depicted as nothing more but black smoke, who tempts Beatrice when she is down in the afterlife to basically eat pomegranates, which is obviously a reference to Persephone and Hades in Greek mythology. But they do often pick and choose different bits and pieces. That's obviously a reference to the original Divine Comedy poem by Dante Alighieri, where he references Cerberus, and he references all sorts of other people as well, and all sorts of other, devices and motifs from mythology and various other things. Like he references Cleopatra at one point as well. And that's sort of the same with the game. There's all sorts of references to other things. But the way he kind of is depicted as sort of like a waft of smoke, and he has this very kind of snide, very kind of, gentleman, you know. You could almost imagine him wearing a tuxedo. He's that suave and that sophisticated. But there's almost an element of sinister intent to his desires as well. Like, he's doing this to basically mess with Dante in the game, and he's basically wanting him to possess Beatrice so that he can have Beatrice for himself. But you never quite know whether he's just doing this to basically F with Dante, or whether he genuinely does love Beatrice. I don't think he does in this instance, because I think he basically just wants to destroy innocence. That's his entire MO. That's how he operates in the world of hell. He wants to manipulate people so that he can step up and go further into paradise to get even with God. So effectively, that's his entire story. He's depicted as a whiff of smoke, but then he's also depicted as the horned devil of treachery, which is made of ice and icicles and water and various other things. The ultimate personification of betrayal and treachery, like cold and bitterness. And it's a very good interpretation of that character. So that's my number 2, and to round things off, my number 1 is Leviathan from the Hellraiser franchise. And Hellraiser is a very interesting horror series, because it's one of those series that, as much as we like to talk about how much we love horror, not much love is given to the Hellraiser series, and I don't really know why. It's a really wonderful horror series. It's very gothic. It's very classical Universal horror Hollywood, but there's a little bit of Hammer horror as well, in the sense that it's mostly British. It was created by a British author, Clive Barker, and it's got a mostly British cast with Claire Higgins as Julia Cotton and Doug Bradley as Pinhead. And it's a very fantastic series, and I think Leviathan is one of its key elements of why it works. Because Leviathan isn't really an animal, nor is he a human. Leviathan is a creation. He is basically a mechanism. He is effectively, if you look at the way Leviathan looks, he looks like the Lament configuration when he appears in Hellbound Hellraiser 2. In fact, if you really think about it, if you Google what angels are supposed to look like in the Bible, they're not depicted as humans with wings. They're depicted as kind of like a mechanism, like a ball that has various different gears and mechanisms turning and twisting. And that's kind of the way Leviathan looks, but except it looks more like a jagged spike almost. And it's shooting all these elements of electricity out of the four corners of these labyrinths. But that's because he wants to maintain control of the world. He wants to maintain control of hell. And what I really like about Leviathan is there's actually a very interesting detail when I was rewatching it one day, where a lot of if you look at Pinhead's transformation, if you're squeamish, don't look at the transformation of Pinhead from, Elliot Spencer to Pinhead, because obviously you will want to be sick. But if you're not squeamish at all and you look at the details of the way Leviathan looks in his creation of making Cenobites, it does look like Chernard's Cenobite, with his tentacles, and how he's putting all the different pins into Elliot Spencer's head, and how he chops one down into the centre of his brain, and he's like going, oh! It really does add a certain level of... Leviathan wants to get rid of Pinhead. Leviathan is actually really kind of jealous of Pinhead. So he's kind of almost doing what God did in Paradise Lost to the devil, where he's basically thinking, oh, you're a bit too big for your boots, Pinhead. I'm going to create someone who's going to overthrow you. And I'm going to work through this Cenobite, this Chernard Cenobite, to make sure that you're gotten rid of so that I can, claim back control of hell. And it's such a very interesting idea. I wonder what you guys think of that theory in the comments. Does that sound like I'm reaching a little bit? But that's such an interesting idea, that he looks very similar to Chernard's Cenobite, in the sense that he uses those tentacles that do kind of create the pins, and then he puts them in Pinhead's face, and that basically creates Pinhead. There's so many interesting details to that, but I really want to know what you think of this, and I want to know what you guys think of the list in general. Do you like this list? Do you want me to make more lists like this? And let me know what your list would be down in the comments. Let me know what you think of this list overall, and I hope you're all having a very good day. Happy New Year again, and I hope you're all having a good day. Take care, bye for now.